A pensioner is found dead at the foot of the stairs in her home. The grim discovery marks the beginning of 8 years of bitter wrangling and recrimination. From the outset, police have maintained that Annie Davies' death was a tragic accident. Her family insist she was the victim of a vicious murder. Erskine, a quiet residential town and home to church elder Annie Davies. She moved from Glasgow with her husband to spend the twilight years away from the city. 14 years after her husband's death, Annie's life also came to an end, but not in the peaceful and dignified way that she and her family might have hoped for. Annie Gordon was born in Govan in 1914. A strong Christian upbringing instilled values that shaped the rest of her life. In her mid-20s, she married John Davies. They raised 3 children, Joan, Fred and Brian. And when they left home, the couple moved from Govan to the new town of Erskine on the banks of the Clyde.
Oh, she was a diamond. She was kind, considerate, loving. When we were growing up as kids, she was a nurse, a cook, a chef, a seamstress, a bicycle repair lady. She done everything for us. She was a mother. She would find good in anybody. She would just draw the goodness out of people, you know. She was very gentle in her own way. She would actually have done anything for anybody. There was nothing that she would have refused. If you'd asked her for money, she'd have given you it.
At around 7:30 a.m. on Saturday, May the 30th, 1998, Anne McNay was lying in bed thinking ahead to a day's shopping in Glasgow. Her upstairs neighbour, Annie Davies, was already up and about.
I heard her getting up in the morning because the floorboards creak when she walks across them. I was meeting my daughter, so I was in a hurry to go out. The postman came about 9, I think it was. I never noticed anything wrong.
As the postman made his deliveries, he noticed a pair of spectacles jamming open the front door of Annie Davies' flat. He found it strange, but thought no more of it. It wasn't until Anne McNay returned from a shopping trip later that afternoon that the full horror of what lay behind the door became apparent.
I noticed Annie's door was open, and her glasses were in between the door, keeping the door open. So I knocked the door and I shouted at her, there was nothing, and I knocked again, and there was nothing. So I pushed the door, and it stuck, and that's when I just seen this out with her head. And I panicked, and I just ran.
Anne McNay alerted a neighbour, who phoned an ambulance and then contacted Annie's son Brian to break the shock news.
Hello.
When I entered the house, my mum was lying on her back at the bottom of the stairs with her head pointing upwards from the stairs. I could see some of the injuries in the partial light that was there, and for that time I was spared the full horror of what her facial injuries actually were. The paramedics then came in, I left, and they came out shortly after that and announced that my mum was gone. Some time after that, perhaps an hour or so, the CID officer came in and announced that my mum had fallen down the stairs.
In a case like this, where you've got an elderly lady who's found lying at the bottom of a flight of stairs, and the early indications are that she's been using new bifocal spectacles, then it's easy, I think, to jump to assumptions that, you know, an old lady has fallen down the stairs.
In the evening, when they took my mother's body away, the detective sergeant had asked me if I had a set of keys to the house, which I passed on to him, and we went home.
Brian Davies phoned his older brother Fred, who travelled through the night to Erskine from his home in Lancashire.
I wanted to get my mother's address book from the house to inform friends and so on. So I phoned the police. There was a liaison officer with the phone, so I phoned him up and asked if there was any chance I could get into the house to get this. And what he said was, well, it looks like it's just an accident, I think it'll be okay. So the police delivered the keys the following day.
When the brothers went round to their mother's flat, it became apparent that there was more to her death than met the eye.
I had looked for my mother's purse because I knew she had a substantial amount of money in it, and I couldn't find it. Similarly, there was a bag she used on a daily basis that appeared to have vanished as well. And I looked in the tray where she kept her house keys, they were gone. We sat and we talked about it, and the more we talked, the more we were both convinced that it was more than just an accident. You know? So I phoned the police at that point, 4 times in fact, before I could get any attention off them. And they advised us to leave the house, lock it up and return home, which we did.
The following day, the brothers formally identified their mother's body ahead of a post-mortem examination. The extent of her facial injuries added to their growing conviction that she'd been murdered. The intense police activity in the vicinity of Annie Davies' flat suggested detectives were thinking along the same lines.
The area had been cordoned off. There were several police vans. I then returned home, obviously announced to the family that's a murder inquiry underway.
Well, there was a thorough investigation, post-mortem examination, door-to-door inquiries, contact with family members, with relatives, and really and truly just as you would do in a murder investigation.